Welcome back, intrepid students. This will be what I hope is the last video, but we might need to squeeze one more in just to cover the remaining bits of information. We've got, for this video, a bunch of CSS3 background properties that we're going to cover. Now remember, Internet Explorer 7 and 8, they don't support CSS3. In fact, repeat it after me. Internet Explorer 7 and 8 don't support CSS3. This is an important distinction to make. One of the issues that many students have had in prior semesters when we graded assignments that used IE 7 and 8 was a failure to remember that the things that we're covering are CSS3 and that they don't work in IE 7 and IE 8. But they simply don't. There are workarounds, there are other solutions you can choose, but as a general rule, if you write these, it doesn't matter how many vendor prefixes you use, no matter what else you do, they will simply not work the same way as they do in modern browsers. So, for the purpose of this course, it shouldn't generally be an issue. However, if you are actually launching a live website and the possibility exists that some of your audience, including potentially your client, are running older versions of Internet Explorer, know that you need to have a backup plan. Okay, so let's get going. The properties that we want to look at have to do with sizing, positioning, and other characteristics in terms of using background images. We are going to start off with the background origin and background clip properties real quickly. There is an image called bottom.jpg, and what we're going to do is we're going to put that as the background for the footer. So I'm going to just say footer and background image, and that's going to be URL images bottom.jpg, and then background repeat no repeat. So let's see what that ends up doing. Now, one thing you may or may not remember is that the background, that this container is 1,000 pixels plus an additional 30 pixels in width on either side because we added 15 pixels of padding on the left and right. And if you look closely at the image, you can kind of see it. This image starts over here at your top left because that is your default background positioning. But you've got about 30 pixels over here on the right. So let's say that we wanted this image to be placed in a way where it worked with the padding, right? So, you know, you could certainly play with margins and such, but rather than mess with any of that, you can use what is called the background origin. And what background origin does is it allows us to determine what the reference point is for background images. By default, background images are going to fill the space that is filled with padding and with content. But let's say that we just wanted it to fill the area that's got content, right? So what we'll say is content box. And what that should do is exactly that. Now you can see that it is scooted over and it's taking over the space that just has content. If we wanted to see the entire background graphic, we would also have to do some tweaking in terms of the size. Like what I'll do here is I will say footer, I will say rather padding top, and I know that this picture is 200 and some odd pixels, so I'll give it a padding on the top of 300, which should allow the entire image to be shown. But the issue, once again, is that what we're saying here is that the image is only going to take up the content area. So increasing the padding doesn't really help in this case. What we're going to want to do is actually give it a height. So be aware that your strategy here is going to really just depend on a variety of factors. Okay, and if I wanted to make this text visible, I could either have the footer text be a different color, or I could have my background position. So that scoots it down a little bit more, and you can play with padding and all sorts of other values in order to kind of help you get the effect you're going for. But hopefully that'll help clarify how that works a little bit. So that gives us the background origin. It tells us where it should begin in relation to the box model. You can also have what's called the background clip. So let's say, for instance, that we have an image. Goodness, I don't have a really good example of this. But what the background clip does is it's very similar to the background origin, but what it does, instead of telling the browser where to begin the background image, it limits the area in which the background can appear. So let's say that the background image filled an entire area, but we only wanted a small section of it to appear. So we might choose to tell it only show that which is within the padded area, or that which is within the content area, or that which is within the border area. And those are your three options, basically. You've got your padding box, your content box, or your border box. And they all just indicate, hey, you're going to take up the space that's taken up by everything within this container, as well as this other element, out to the outside of this other element. So those are the things to know about background origin and background clip. Another really super duper cool feature is what's called the background size. Okay, so let's say that instead of this sort of crazy gradient that we've got here, we opted instead to have a background image that just sort of was there and, you know, didn't repeat itself or anything like that. The background image that I've got here is called background page underscore big. So we're going to save that and take a look at what ends up happening. So what happens is we get this really cool background, and it's a bench, and it's repeating over and over and over again. So you might remember that the way to fix that is by going into background repeat and saying no repeat. And that, of course, has the picture only appear in the upper left corner, and you've just got white on the rest of the page. So let's say that I wanted this picture to be large enough to fill the screen. You've got a couple different options. You've got, well, ultimately what you have is you have the background size property. And you've got a couple of different ways of accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. One of which is by specifying a width. Now, when you say background size 100%, what happens is the background image gets resized. And it's generally pretty proportional. What you're going to find is that this background image is now going to fill the width of the page. However, because it's being sized proportionately, luckily it's got a little bit of a fade. It fades into the white, so it works okay to do it this way, to just sort of have it fade into the background. And once again, you can tell it to stay fixed so that you can have this pretty background image for the entire length of the page, no matter how long it goes on. So that's one way of using background size. You can also use keywords. One keyword is what is called contain. So let's take a look at what contain does. So when we look at contain, we see it does pretty much the same thing as the 100%. It fills the page, keeps the size of the image proportional, so as a result it doesn't fill the entire height of the page. All right, let's try one of the other keywords you might choose to use. This is cover. Whoa, that's a really big difference. What cover does is it just completely resizes the image so that it fills the screen. That can result in a little bit of clipping. It might mean that the left and the right of your image might be cut off, or the top and bottom, depending on if the picture is portrait or landscape. But basically, it fills the background with your image, cropping off whatever doesn't need to be visible in order to have it fill the image and stay proportional. So that gives us origin, clip, and background size. Be aware, if you look really closely, that background image doesn't look as nice as it did. Luckily, it's kind of faded off in the background, so it's not as obvious. But be aware that if you take a little tiny picture and you make it really big, the quality is going to suffer as a result. Two other things for us to cover real quickly, one of which is probably going to end up being on a second video, but one of these is the use of multiple background images. It used to be we had to do all sorts of crazy hacks, and the book actually talks about a hack that you can use by using the before and the after pseudo selectors in order to apply multiple background images to the same element. Other ways have included having additional divs. And in fact, the way this class used to be taught, that's exactly what we did, is we would create empty divs purely for the purpose of holding background images that we wanted in order to get the visual look we wanted. Well, of course, that's not semantic. That's not what we're going for. So, and we're no longer looking at trying to have backwards compatibility with older browsers. And actually, the before and the after would probably even work okay with IE7 and IE8. So, take a look at the book, read through that, and kind of play with that technique a little bit. But ultimately, the way background images work is you use the background image property, and you list the images you want. So let's say that I wanted this background image that we've got right now, and I'm going to leave it as contain. And let's say that I also wanted this one. So let's see what that does. So you can see that what's happened is you've got this background. I changed it to contain so that it takes up the entire width. And then I have the second one. And what this would generally do is this would appear underneath that particular image if they were to actually overlap. In this case, they don't need to overlap. But you can see that you can apply multiple images to the background. And if you look through the book, it'll talk you through the process of doing the repeat and doing the positioning and figuring out what's on top of what. But as a general rule, understand that the order in which you list items is kind of starting from the top going down to the bottom, the order in which they're layered. So the very first picture you list is going to be the top layer, the next picture you list will be the middle layer, and the next picture you list will be the bottom layer, ad infinitum, with however many images it is you're adding. I've never seen it done with more than 3. That doesn't mean you can't. I'd say go ahead and play with that a little bit and come back to me with any questions with the next class. The last thing we are going to look at, and that's going to require a separate video just because we only have a couple minutes left here with this capture, and that's going to be using gradients and how to take all of this ridiculous code we're generating and use shorthand so that you don't have to come up with 4 or 5 different property value pairs. So I'll see you in just a minute and we'll get that started.